no-hitter is supposed to belong to youth. It's supposed to belong to violence and some hot-armed young 24-year-old throwing baseballs through a wall, not through a lineup. But baseball is not a sport that cares very much about what's supposed to happen. Because on July 9th, 1976, the Houston Astros handed the ball to Larry Dierker, an original Astro, a pitcher already carrying 13 major league seasons on his back, although he's only 29 years old. He feels older in baseball years than plenty of men who had already actually turned 35. His arm hurt. People were wondering what he had left. His earned run average was above 4, and the Astros were under 500. And the Expos are one of the worst teams in baseball. There's only 12,511 people in the Astrodome that night. And by the end of it, Larry Dierker had thrown the fifth no-hitter in Houston Astros franchise history, not by overpowering everybody, and not by turning into the younger version of Larry Dierker again, but by doing something maybe even stranger. He got older for one night in exactly the right way. He pitched smart, patiently, and a man who understood that if his best fastball was not always going to show up, his brain still could. If you want to understand baseball, really understand it, you have to love nights like this, because it's not just a story about a no-hitter. This is a story about a player realizing what he is now, and then turning that version of himself into history. Welcome back to the Astro 100. I'm documenting one game per player until I reach 100. Tonight is Astro 19, Larry Dierker. Where's Larry Dierker? Right here. July 9th, 1976, Montreal Expos, Houston Astros. Astrodome. Houston wins 6-0. And yes, this is the no-hitter. But what makes this episode interesting to me is this isn't a clean fairy tale version of a no-hitter. This isn't a future Hall of Famer at the absolute peak of his power, flattening a great opponent in front of a giant crowd in the middle of a pennant race. This is something far messier. This is an original Astro, already carrying some wear and tear, and feeling the drag of mileage, hearing whispers about what his arm can still do, stepping out on a Friday night against a weak club, and creating one of the most permanent games any Astro ever played. Larry Dierker is one of those players who almost doubles as franchise infrastructure. He debuted for Houston on his 18th birthday, struck out Willie Mays in his first inning in the major leagues, became the first 20-game winner in Astros history in 1969. He made several all-star teams. He later became a broadcaster, then a front office man, then a manager, and a major part of organizational emotional memory. So this is one of those episodes where the player is not just a player. He's a corridor. He connects the Houston Colt 45s to the Astrodome Astros. He's connecting expansion baseball to respectability and the team on the field to the team in the booth and the dugout years later. On this night in 1976, with Houston sitting at 39-44 and Montreal down at 25-49, with the All-Star break almost here, Larry Dierker gave Houston one of those nights that can make a mediocre season feel eternal. So tonight, that's our story. Not just the no-hitter, but the man who threw it, the team that needed it, the ballpark that shaped it, and the baseball truth sitting underneath all of it. Sometimes you don't become unforgettable by getting stronger. Sometimes you do it by adjusting. All right, let's take the heartbeat of each clubhouse. Let's start with the mood, because records matter, but they only tell part of the story. Clubhouses have weather. Houston comes into this game 5 games under 500 at 39-44. It's not a disaster. It's not hopeless, but it is annoying. That's probably the best word for it, annoying. The Astros are in 4th place in the National League West. The Big Red Machine is out there being the Big Red Machine, and Houston's 12 and a half games back. So the Astros aren't walking into the Dome that night feeling like a sleeping giant. They're walking in feeling like a team that keeps showing flashes of competence, then ultimately reminding itself why it's still under 500. In the days just before this game, they lost 7-2 to Cincinnati on July 4th, then beat the Mets 1-0, then got hammered 12-4 by New York, then squeaked by Montreal 7-6 the night before. There's no momentum here. That's turbulence. Houston's trying to stabilize. Now take a look at Montreal. The Expos come in at 25-49, and after this loss, they'll be 25-50. They're buried deep in the National League East. They're not just losing. They're being smothered by the shape of the season. Their week before this game is rough too. Losses to Cincinnati, more losses to Cincinnati, then a close loss to Houston on July 8th. They're not arriving in Texas angry and dangerous. They're arriving tired, thin, and vulnerable. And that matters because one of the truths of baseball is that no-hitters don't always happen against the strongest possible opponent. Sometimes they can happen against a club already carrying a little emotional static into the night. Still, weak opponent or not, no-hitters don't just hand themselves out. You still have to navigate every inning. You still have to land every out and survive the few moments where the whole thing could crack. And Larry Dierker would have those moments tonight. This game lands in a strange part of the baseball calendar. It's July, very hot. All-Star break is right around the corner. The 1976 All-Star game is about to be played in Philadelphia, which in bicentennial summer makes the whole thing feel a little more ceremonial than usual. Baseball that week is starting to split into two emotional categories. You have the contenders trying to get to the break clean. You have bad teams trying to limp to it. You also have players trying to figure out whether the first half of the season means what it seems to mean. George Foster's about to become the All-Star Game MVP. The National League is still flexing. The Giants are still casting a giant shadow over everything else in the National League. Ironically enough, also including the Giants. Meanwhile, in Houston, the Astros are not exactly one of the glamour stories in the sport. They're not leading the news or carrying the league. They're not loaded with any Cooperstown certainty. And that's exactly why a game like this matters so much, because baseball history is not only created by the biggest stage. Sometimes it's created by the side room, by the fourth place team. Sometimes it's created in front of 12,000 people on a Friday night in a building that looks like the future. Sometimes that's better because it feels discovered instead of announced. Now, here's the idea I want hanging over this episode. A no-hitter is not always a story about domination. Sometimes it's an adaptation story. That matters because when people hear no-hitter, they tend to imagine one shape, a flamethrower, a mountain, a game where the pitcher simply has too much stuff for the hitters to live with. That's not this. Larry Dierker himself essentially admitted that before the game he made a decision. He was not going to go out there and try to throw the ball through people. He was going to pitch craftily, not powerfully. That distinction is everything. He wasn't denying what he once was. He's acknowledging what he is now. And that's a grown man baseball theme. These are young player stories where the point is what a man might become. There are also old player stories where the point is what the body's taken away. Then there are these transitional stories. This is one of those. Larry Dierker on this night is not a rookie, and he's not yet a washed-up relic. Not to say he ever was. He's not a legend in sepia tone. He's something harder to talk about, maybe more interesting. He's a still dangerous pitcher trying to figure out in public what shape his danger now takes. That's baseball. That's life. And that's why this game is bigger than just the word no-hitter. Let's get into the managers and the starting pitchers. On the Houston side, the manager is Bill Verdon. And Verdon is exactly the kind of baseball figure who fits this sort of game. He'd been the NL Rookie of the Year in 1955. He also won a Gold Glove. He later built a reputation as a no-nonsense manager who cared about fundamentals, structure, and accountability. By 1976, he's in his first full season running Houston. That personality matters. Verdon doesn't feel like a circus ringleader. He feels like a straighten up and play it right type of manager. That's useful for a team like the Astros. They're not trying to become a spectacle. They're trying to become sound. On the Montreal side, the manager is Carl Cool. Cool's not a long-term central figure in franchise history, and that actually tells you something about where Montreal is. The Expos in 1976 are still searching for stability, trying to turn youth and possibility into a real major league identity. They're not there yet. Now the pitchers. Don Stanhouse starts for Montreal, and this is important. He's not a sacrificial lamb. He comes in at 6-3 with a 2.18 ERA, one of the most pleasant surprises on a very bad club. He entered the season with a lousy record, but for the moment, he's giving Montreal real innings. So Houston is not beating up on a total punching bag. Then we have Dierker, a right-hander, original Astro, one of the most accomplished pitchers in club history, already twice an All-Star, and the first 20-game winner the franchise ever had. But he's also dealing with creeping injuries that make a baseball player age faster than his birth certificate. He enters the night at 7-8 with a 4.43 earned run average. That matters because if you're a casual fan glancing at the page, this doesn't look like a man about to throw a no-hitter. It looks like a veteran trying to hold the middle of the season together. That makes this game better because history sometimes arrives wearing ordinary clothes. This is a fascinating module because the answer for this is basically not really. There's not many Hall of Famers in here at all. That's good. The Expos lineup has Pepe Mangual, Jim Lytle, Mike Jorgensen, Andre Thornton, Larry Parrish, Pete McCannon, Larry Johnson, Pepe Frias, and Don Stanhouse. I don't think I know any of them. The Astros lineup has Greg Gross, Rob Andrews, Enos Cabell, Bob Watson, Jose Cruz, Cliff Johnson, Wilbur Howard, Ed Herman, Roger Metzger, and Larry Dierker. That's not a Hall of Fame parade. There's no giant bronze plaque confrontations all over the diamond. And that's exactly why this game breathes the way it does. It feels local, it feels earned. It feels like real baseball mythology instead of mythology assembled and advanced. That doesn't mean there's no talent here. Bob Watson is one of the best players in franchise history. Cruz is becoming Jose Cruz. Enos Cabell is useful and athletic. Andre Thornton and Larry Parrish are serious players for Montreal. But the absence of obvious immortals changes the flavors. This isn't a game where the story is legend versus legend. This is a game where the story is one franchise pillar rose above an ordinary night and made it extraordinary. That difference is worth underlining. A casual fan might assume baseball gets interesting only when the most famous names are involved, and this game says otherwise. This isn't a heavy smack talk game, and there's no bad blood here, no revenge angle or press war. There's no beanball chapter waiting to be revisited because the tension's not hatred, it's frustration. Houston's annoyed at being mediocre. Montreal is exhausted by being bad. That's the emotional setup. Sometimes sports media wants every game to be a blood feud opera, but baseball is a quieter kind of friction. Sometimes the friction is between a team and its own expectations. Sometimes it's between a player and his own body, and sometimes it's between a club and the standings. That's what we have here. If you want the pregame smack talk, I think it sounds less like insults and more like internal muttering. Houston saying, let's just win the games we're supposed to win. And Montreal saying, can we please just get one clean night? Then Larry Dierker walks out and makes sure that one side definitely does not get that clean night. All right, there's no classic Montreal-Houston connection here. There's not a rivalry that's inherited before you're old enough to understand why. But there's a connection. They're still both relatively young National League club in the mid-1970s, still trying to become something more stable. They're still in that franchise age where the past is not long enough to carry you. The future hasn't arrived to rescue you. Houston by 76 at least has more institutional memory. The Dome, the old Colt 45 roots, a few genuinely important pitchers, and a growing sense that the club belongs. Montreal still feels provisional, still becoming, still searching. Maybe that's the better common thread here. Expansion-era baseball trying to harden into something permanent. One franchise is farther along in the process, the other still wobbling, and in this game that difference shows. Because Houston looks like a team with enough backbone to support a masterpiece. Montreal looks like a team that can accidentally become part of somebody else's monument. Okay, let's treat the Astrodome as a character. The side quest here is the building. The Astrodome is not just the venue, it's part of the action. And that matters because old baseball stories often let the stadium do the emotional work. We don't fully notice it sometimes unless we stop and look at it. The Astrodome, still in 1976, is still one of the weird cathedrals in American sports. Indoor baseball still feels futuristic. Artificial turf still feels synthetic and sharp-edged, a little more engineered than baseball is supposed to be. Yet on this night in the Dome, something does happen very old-fashioned. It collaborates. Late in the game, Montreal finally gets a few balls squared up. Mike Jorgensen drives one deep. So does Jose Morales. Dierker said the big center field in the alleys helped him, which means the ballpark is in the story. This no-hitter isn't just about Larry versus Montreal. It's Larry plus geometry versus Montreal. Larry plus distance. Larry plus a giant indoor outfield swallowing enough danger. to keep the thing alive. And I like that because it reminds us how many baseball achievements are cooperative, even when they're remembered as one individual. The pitcher gets the headline, but the field dimensions, the defense, the catcher, the environment, they all get their fingerprints on the result. That's part of what makes no-hitters so eerie. They belong to one man and several ghosts at the same time. Larry Dierker is from Hollywood, California, signed young, a big right-hander. From the start, there's something slightly cinematic about the shape of his baseball life. He debuts in 1964 on his 18th birthday. Think about that. Not around age 18, not soon after turning 18. On the day. And in his first inning in the major leagues, he strikes out Willie Mays. It's one of those details that sounds made up because it's too neat. But baseball, when it wants to, can write introductions better than fiction. From there, Dierker becomes one of the true foundational pitchers the Houston franchise ever had. In 1969, he goes 20-13 with a 2.33 earned run average, throws 305 innings, completes 20 games, and becomes the first 20-game winner in Astros history. He makes the All-Star team in 1969, again in 1971, and because he's there so early, he becomes woven into Houston baseball identity before the identity is even fully formed. But careers don't stay still. By the mid-70s, Dierker's no longer just the rising local ace. He's carrying damage, hand trouble, shoulder trouble, pain that doesn't announce itself as an ending, but does make everything less clean than it once was. And that's the crucial part for this bio, for this episode. Because if you only see the shiny version, an original Astro and All-Star, the franchise icon, you miss the actual drama of July 9th, 1976. The drama is that this game comes after enough wear and tear that no-hitter feels less likely, not more. And yet there's one more great chapter left in his right arm, and that's why I find Dierker so compelling. He's not merely good, he's representative. He represents what it means for a franchise to grow up. He also represents what it means for a pitcher to realize his career may not be endless and still finds a way to add one unforgettable night. And that's the center of this whole episode. Larry Dierker had come close to no-hitters before. He flirted with one in 1966. He took another deep into a game in 1969. So this wasn't some totally random baseball miracle from a man who'd never hinted at such a thing. But that almost makes it sadder and better because the near misses happened when the idea of a no-hitter made more intuitive sense, a younger arm with more force and less mileage. And the one that actually lands comes later, when people are beginning to wonder what's left. That's beautiful because it's almost unfairly so, because it reframes his whole career. It says, no, you were not just a pitcher who was great when you were fresh. You're also capable of surviving the erosion and creating something permanent. Dierker later talked about this game with a sense of disbelief. He didn't really expect a no-hitter to arrive at that point in his career. He even described it as a gift from God. And I understand that language, because sometimes the game does feel given, not easy, not accidental, but given. As if all the earlier almosts, all the injuries and the years, the invisible adjustments and the frustration and the memory, if it was all pulled together on one night and finally decided to resolve. For Dierker, this game is not just one win in the middling season. It's validation, survival, and legacy hardening in real time. All right, 18 minutes into the video, let's talk about the game. Top of the first, Pepe Mangual, out. Jim Lytle, out. Mike Jorgensen, out. 3 up, 3 down. And that doesn't sound dramatic yet because the first inning of a no-hitter isn't dramatic. In retrospect, it never is. Sounds ordinary. Only starts acquiring electricity later. In the bottom of the first, Houston does nothing. So after one inning, we're scoreless and normal. Top of the second is where the first real tension arrives. Andre Thornton walks to lead off. Immediately, there's a man on base. The possibility that if this were going to be one of those bad Larry Dierker nights in 76, here's the route. Then Thornton steals second, and now there's a runner in scoring position and nobody out. Larry Dierker comes up, Larry Parrish strikes out, and Dierker strikes him out. Big out. Then Pete McCannon hits a liner right back at Dierker. Dierker catches it, and then he doubles Thornton off second. It's not just 2 outs. It's one of those plays that changes the emotional temperature of a game. It's the first real sign that maybe this night belongs to the pitcher. The bottom of the second, Houston goes to work. Bob Watson walks, Jose Cruz doubles, and Watson scores. Houston leads 1-0. Then things get messy for Don Stanhouse. A wild pitch, walks, traffic, and Dierker himself comes up with one out, lifts the fly ball deep enough to score Cruz, 2-0 Astros. There's something nice about that. The pitcher giving himself breathing room. The top of the third, Dierker settles the Expos down. Bottom of the third, Houston threatens again but does not score. Still, the shape is changing. Stanhouse is working too hard. Dierker's not giving anything away. Top of the fourth, the no-hitter is now real enough to whisper, but not real enough to trust. The Expos continue to get nothing. In the bottom of the fourth, the Astros stretch it out. Ed Herman homers, and now it's 3-0. Roger Metzger singles later in the inning, and Rob Andrews gets him home. Now it's 4-0. At this point, the game begins to separate into its two halves. On one side, Houston's offense, which is steadily and politely making sure the pressure isn't crushing. On the other, Dierker, who's starting to realize that thing in front of him might be more than just a nice night. The top of the fifth was dangerous, and this is where plenty of no-hitters go to die. Not because somebody crushes the ball, but because the pitcher loses the strike zone for a minute. Dierker walks two men in the inning. That matters because it reminds us this isn't some antiseptic masterpiece. Dierker wasn't untouchable. He's negotiating and surviving. But he escapes again. No hit, no run. In the bottom of the fifth, Houston adds two more. Bob Watson reaches. Ed Herman drives him in. Later, Roger Metzger singles and Cliff Johnson scores, with a Parrish error in the sequence helping the inning along. Now it's 6-0, and that score is enormous. Because a no-hitter when your team leads by 1 or 2 feels fragile. But at 6-0, it feels like the pitcher can start seeing the horizon. In the 6th inning, no hit. 7th inning, no hit. Now the crowd knows it. The game is no longer just baseball rhythm. It's dread on one side and dissipation on the other. In the top of the 7th, Mike Jorgensen reaches on a walk? No. Hold that thought. The real fear there comes from contact later in the game, not a hit, because the hits still never arrive. Bottom of the 7th, the Astros do nothing. Top of the 8th, Dierker faces Barry Foote, Tim Foley, and pinch hitter Jose Morales. And this is one of the prettiest parts of the whole night, because the no-hitter bends without breaking. There are hard-hit balls. The Expos are finally putting some charge into the contact. But the Astrodome helps. Deep center helps. The alleys help. The whole giant indoor organism helps. No hits. Bottom of the 8th, Houston goes quietly. So we go to the 9th. 6-0. Larry Dierker at the brink. 26 outs recorded, top of the 9th. Pepe Manguel strikes out. 1 out. Jim Lytle strikes out. 2 outs. Now the whole building is compressed into one last batter. Mike Jorgensen. He hits a ground ball to first. Bob Watson fields it. And Watson later said there's no way he was risking a throw to Dierker. So he takes it himself. That's the out. That's history. That's the 5th no-hitter in franchise history. Montreal, 0 runs on 0 hits, 2 errors. Houston, 6 runs on 11 hits, no errors. Larry Dierker, 9 innings, no hits, 4 walks, 8 strikeouts. Astros finished 40-44. Expos 25-50. And a night that began like a footnote ends like a monument. Now for Houston, this game is bigger than one mark in the standings. Yes, it gets them to 40-44, and it's a clean win over a bad team, and it's a nice way to head towards the break. More than that, though, it gives the Astros a story, and not every middling team gets one of those. A lot of 500-ish baseball teams are remembered only in aggregate. This team gets a game most people can point at, a game that says for one night, this mattered. For Montreal, it's humiliation, not useless humiliation, but bad teams sometimes exist as scenery in other people's memories. That's cruel, but it's true. The 1976 Astros are in that zone. They finished 55-107. They're the worst team in the majors. Carl Cool does not survive the season. This game is part of the larger truth. When you're bad enough, you're not just losing games. You're vulnerable to becoming part of other franchises' treasured stories. And that happened here. But even then, baseball preserves the humanity of it. The Expos weren't cartoon losers. They had players, and they had nights where they thought they might win. They just ran into a veteran who found the exact shape of excellence for one night. Now, if you're a casual baseball fan or even someone trying to become one, this game is useful because it teaches the sport correctly. A lot of beginner baseball fandom gets built around stars, trophies, giant moments, and obvious drama, and that's fine. Those things are real, but sometimes baseball is richer than that. This game teaches you about patience. It teaches you that a no hitter can be collaborative without feeling diluted. It teaches you that a player's greatest night may arrive after his most famous years seem to be behind him, and that the stadium shape matters, defense matters, and sequencing matters. It teaches you that sometimes 6-0 can still be tense, and that a mediocre team can still contain one perfect memory. Maybe most importantly, it teaches you that baseball is a sport of accumulation until it suddenly becomes a sport of suspense. For 5 innings, this is a game. For the last 3, it's a nerve test. For the 9th, it's a held breath. That conversion is one of the sport's great pleasures. So if somebody asked me why they should care about this game, I would say this. Because it shows how baseball can turn something quiet into something unforgettable without losing its voice. The post-game texture on this one is excellent. Dierker doesn't sound like he's coming out of a cartoon as a conqueror. He sounds amused by the whole thing. He knows how strange it is that the no-hitter arrived at this stage of his career. He talks about how he decided not to overthrow and not to try to throw the ball by everyone, to mix it up and be crafty. That's the quote that matters because it's practically the thesis of the episode. Ed Herman, the catcher who homered in this game, gives you a nice detail too. He says Dierker's fastball was hissing, and I love that because it should suggest that even in a game built on craft, there were still flashes where the old power showed its teeth. And Bob Watson gives you the final out texture. Ground ball to first. He takes it himself, no throw, no risk. He's not going to be the idiot who turns a no-hitter into a weird footnote by rushing the simplest part of the evening. And there's my favorite visual detail of all. After the celebration, the handshakes, after the euphoria, Larry Dierker's in the clubhouse icing that sore elbow. And that's baseball. History in one room, maintenance in the next. Immortality for 2 hours, 26 minutes. And then the body reminding you tomorrow still exists. This wasn't a turning point for Astros to a pennant, and that's fine. Houston does keep beating Montreal immediately after this. They win again on July 10th, and July 11th. Later in July, they keep handling the Expos. So in the short term, the no-hitter sits inside a nice little stretch of Houston doing what it should do against a weak opponent. But the bigger season story remains modest. The Astros finished 80-82, third place in the NL West. They're not a bad team, but they're not a contender either. There's one of those teams you can imagine being interesting if two or three things had broken a little bit cleaner. Montreal, meanwhile, falls all the way to 52 games below 500, the worst record in baseball. Carl Cool is fired in September, and the Expos are still looking for a sturdier future. So this game doesn't reshape the season standings in some grand way. It reshapes the memory. A lot of baseball games matter in the standings and then vanish from memory. This one matters in memory, but barely touches the standings. That's a different kind of importance. But its importance all the same, to me anyways. There's a temptation to treat the no-hitter as a final curtain, but that isn't quite right. It's more like a late career flare. Dierker still has some good work left in him after this night, including another excellent outing a few nights later. But the pain doesn't disappear. The body's already started hearing the arguments. He finishes Astros playing career in 1976, gets traded to St. Louis, and after an injury-plagued 1977, his major league pitching career is over. That can sound abrupt, but with Larry Dierker, the baseball life does not stop when the pitching life does. He goes into broadcasting and becomes one of the familiar voices of Houston Astros baseball. 1997, he moves into dugout as manager, and is good at that too. Very good. He wins division titles. He wins Manager of the Year in 1998 and becomes one of those rare franchise people whose playing career would have made him memorable, even if everything afterward never happened. And then everything afterward happened too. That's why I think this game is so meaningful when placed inside the full Dierker life. It's not just one glorious athletic event. It's one of the clearest snapshots why he matters to Houston at all, because he isn't merely an old name. He's an organizing presence, one of the men who helped teach the franchise what it could sound like and what it could look like and what it felt like when one of its own produced history. Some players make your job easy. With certain names, there's one game everybody already knows. The problem is usually not whether a signature game exists. The problem is whether it's too obvious. With Dierker, the obvious choice is exactly right, because the no-hitter is not just his best-known box score. It's the game that pulls together all the major themes of his career. Original Astro, early promise, later wear, baseball intelligence, franchise and identity, the Astrodome, and one unforgettable payoff. This is the game that lets you talk about Dierker the pitcher and Dierker the symbol at the same time. And that's why it belongs here. And that's why, even though some episodes in this series may need a more creative argument, this one really doesn't. Sometimes a signature game is a signature game for a reason. Next time, we move from the man who threw history to one of the men who helped catch it. Astro 20 will be Bob Watson. And the bridge from this episode is almost too perfect. Watson walks, scores twice, steals a base, and then records the final out of the no-hitter by fielding Mike Jorgensen's grounder and deciding there's absolutely no reason to risk a throw. That's an ending handoff at the same time, because Bob Watson's one of those central Astros of this era. Steady, dangerous, and productive. And in this game, he was quietly essential. So Astro 20 begins where Astro 19 ends, with Bob Watson holding the baseball, stepping on first base, and making sure Larry Dierker's masterpiece becomes official. Larry Dierker's no-hitter is easy to remember as a stat. July 9th, 1976. 9 innings, 0 hits, 4 walks, 8 strikeouts. Astros 6, Expos 0. But if that's all you remember, you're missing the best part. The best part is the shape of it. A vet who's not old but feels old in baseball terms. A pitcher with a hurting arm and a team stuck below 500. A weak opponent, yes, but still a major league lineup that has to be retired 27 times. A sparse crowd in the Astrodome and a catcher who homers. A first baseman who takes the final out himself. A ballpark that keeps danger in the yard. And a man who, for one night, stops trying to be who he used to be and becomes something more memorable. That's why Larry Dierker matters. And that's why this game matters. And that's why Astro 19 belongs exactly here. This is not a no-hitter built only on force. It was built on intelligence, control, timing, nerve, and acceptance. Dierker didn't turn back the clock. He beat it another way. For one night in Houston, that was enough to become history. Well, thanks for watching.